Hey guys, this is Raz, and before we get started with my interview with Bonnie Siegel, the genius behind the branding of Ted Cruz on his presidential campaign, I want to give you guys two quick thoughts. One, my voice totally sucks. I'm still getting over losing it this last week and being down sick for a couple of days, but I want to get the podcast out there, and so that's what we do. I just sound like I've been smoking a lot more than I actually do. Second, and most importantly, we're going to be doing our advanced candidate course. We're releasing that as a self-paced online course starting in August. In early August, we're going to start releasing that. Basically every week we're releasing a new module. You'll be able to purchase that through the mycampaigncoach.com website, and we're really excited about it. We took it live last fall, and we're basically re-engineering that so that you can take it at your own pace, as well as take part in bi-weekly Q&A sessions that we're going to be doing live, myself and Andrew and my campaign coach team. Talk with you guys, all the folks going through the course, whoever wants to hop on, and answering your questions and having some real great Q&A time. So that's going to be a great package and something we're incredibly excited about that you guys have access to. And the best way for you to keep updated on when that comes out, the pricing promotions we'll be doing and those kind of things is going to be go to mycampaigncoach.com and sign up for our email list. Every week we send out campaign tips and some of the best content we've found online and created during the week. And we got some great open rates on it, got great reviews from folks. And so we think it's a great thing to add to your weekly email reading. So go to mycampaigncoach.com and sign up for our email list, and you'll be the first to know about all the great stuff that we're going to be rolling out in the next couple of weeks. All right, now let's get to the interview with Bonnie.
This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. We couldn't do the podcast without support from Campaign Sidekick, so I'd love it if you go to campaignsidekick.vote and get a free demo to see what sets them apart from every other software platform out there. I'm excited to have Bonnie Siegel joining us this week to discuss campaign and candidate branding. She first crossed my radar due to her incredible work on the Ted Cruz for President campaign, and I've become increasingly fascinated with her work. In 2015, Bonnie became the first person to utilize and successfully implement a new strategy that inevitably changed the game in campaign management: political candidate branding, a crucial ingredient for any successful campaign. Bonnie works with political campaigns and teams, leading, guiding, melding, creating, implementing, managing, and ultimately bringing to market a candidate's political brand identity. Additionally, Bonnie is responsible for steering advanced teams, overseeing and executing campaign and donor events, reviewing messaging, content, and marketing material, and providing campaign merchandise consulting. She does a lot, as you can hear. We're going to talk with her today about the work she did pioneering this facet of campaigns, how she deployed it so successfully on the Cruz presidential campaign, and get her advice on how you can use those same strategies and tactics on your own campaign. Bonnie, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, Raz.
Well, I got to see so much of your work up close as I was on the Super PAC side and you were on the presidential campaign side. And I got to see the incredible events you put together, from that awesome kickoff there at Liberty University for Senator Cruz all the way through all those early states where I was hanging out with you guys and on through Indiana. And it was absolutely incredible. I loved getting to see your work. And I think one of the things that stood out to so many people was Cruz had a very, very strong brand. And you're one of the people that was most heavily responsible for that. We're going to spend some time there, but I want us to start out kind of hearing about your background and where you came from, what got you involved in politics, and how you came up with the idea of really being brand conscious when it comes to candidates.
Well, first of all, I just want to say thanks for having me and for being willing to spread the word about branding. It's sort of our best kept secret, which we've got to sort of break through that clutter and make sure it's no one's secret anymore. I come from a really interesting background because I spent the last 30 years of my career building brands in corporate America, specifically large franchise organizations, did a lot in the restaurant space, have a tremendous background in doing product reveals and product launches for clients all over the world. Our company, ASE Group, which is obviously still in existence, is a strong global event planning firm. But I think the unique part about our branding for ASE was always that we look to work with clients on their brands and bring them to life. And we actually even called ourselves brand translators, taking the essence of what a company or a product had and really making it visible to the eye of the consumer. My work in politics is fascinating because it really just started a couple of years ago. I got a phone call, if I may share a story with you, from a gentleman who was being asked to be the campaign manager for Senator Cruz, and this was back in December of 2014. And he said, I've watched what you've done in corporate America. We've broken bread together. We've been good friends over the years, but at the end of the day, I've never seen anyone do this in the political world. And now that I'm given the chance to be the campaign manager for Cruz, I'd like to start to put together a team that might be a little bit different than what other teams have had. So I want to, give a shout out to Jeff Rowe. He really was sort of, I think, the genius behind bringing branding to the political world. And then from there, he asked me if I would fly down and meet the senator. And I said, well, what am I flying down to? And he said, oh, we're going to put together a branding workshop. And I said, well, if you don't do branding, who's a part of the branding workshop? And he, jokingly said, well, we know we've got an ad agency and we've got our communications people and we've got some pollsters coming and the senator and his wonderful, beautiful wife, Heidi, and, just some key people. Even Kellyanne Conway was there, which was really interesting, how things evolve in life. But I went down and I sat down with the senator, and he was very, 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 very personable and very poignant and said, we're looking to do an exploratory on running for president, Bonnie, and I've been a junior senator now for the last few years. And by the way, how many campaigns have you done? And I said, Senator, this would be my first rodeo. And he just looked at me and he started laughing and he said, really? Tell me more. So I explained to him, what I had done over the years for corporate America and how I have always found that to be one of the ingredients in the mix that usually takes a brand to winning or losing. And he looked at Jeff and he said, I want her. So I became the brand strategist and was told repeatedly at the beginning of the campaign that, no one else has one of these and, what's really unique. And at the end of the day, we just want you to know that we're so proud to have you and, teach us everything you can. And it was a pretty exciting opportunity. And again, I think the campaign itself was designed, especially since you teach designing campaigns, to be very uniquely different. I mean, there were definitely political operatives who had worked on other campaigns, but there was certainly very few that ran by businesses who had come in running their own businesses and then taking over those silos. So as you mentioned earlier, I was in charge of advanced teams. I was in charge of events. I was in charge of looking at all kinds of messaging that would drive an image. And more importantly than anything else is everything a campaign puts out there portrays an image. And that image falls right back on the candidate.
Absolutely.
And if the candidate is not in alignment with the image, let's just say the guest or the consumer, or more so in the political arena, the voter, they get that. They can feel that. It's intuitive to them if somebody's trying to sell them something that's not really the package. Yes. So that in itself was a runway for us to run with. You also mentioned earlier, which I'm fascinated by, and thank you, that Ted Cruz has an unbelievable brand. Well, when I met him, I had never even heard of him. So right. What's so fascinating is how, with the right direction and the right input and the right thinking on the front end of a campaign, and I can't emphasize enough, it can't be 8 months, 10 months, 12 months into it, or and there are ways, and we are working with clients now who are incumbents, of course, but there really should be a methodology put on the front end of any campaign that really thinks through, what is it about this person, this individual, that I feel is compelling enough to share with people and let them, join a movement that would support them. And that's really what we were trying to create, was a courageous conservative movement for Senator Cruz. And whether we use that language moving forward or not, it doesn't matter, because the senator himself now has such an amazing brand to work off of, because he himself lived it every day. He never made it hard for me. He made it easy.
Well, part of what fascinates me about the whole idea of candidate branding is, and it kind of goes back to your background in the for-profit world, with taking a product that's built and is there, and you're trying to help figure out, how do we brand this? How do we make this the public perception of this product? Because my history with Ted goes back all the way to before he was running for Senate here in Texas, and so really he built a pretty strong brand here in Texas. I'm sure that a lot of it was thought out, but so much of it was built around exactly what you're talking about. His personality, his conviction, the principles he stood for, and his willing to work hard. This being that courageous conservative. And
Yeah.
but the deal was that a lot of people hadn't heard of him. I mean, his name
Right,
ID
right.
nationally was not very high, and it was very polarizing for those that did know about him. And so you had a really tough job to take a candidate who was there. He was a senator. He had he knew who he was, and he had identified what he wanted to be about. But how do we make this a brand that can be scaled, that can be communicated, and can be appealing to millions and tens of millions of Americans out there? And it's absolutely a fascinating challenge for a first campaign, especially.
Yeah, it was fascinating, and it was also fascinating, Raz, trying to understand how this building gets built. You know, we were there on the foundation of a presidential building the campaign. I think it was probably one of the first 30 or 40, if not maybe the first 15 or 20 employees really kind of a part of that overall infrastructure. Watching different people come in with different backgrounds. Many of them kind of initially maybe looked at me a little strangely, like, hey, have you ever knocked on any doors? Have you ever handed out any push pieces? Have you made any
Right.
phone calls? You know, and I had to skeevishly say, sorry, guys, that, you know, that's not what I've done in the political world. But what I can do is make sure that what you do every single day is more effective so that you get a broader range of visibility, and you get a better sense of what it is you're trying to do. We've got a very unique candidate here. This is not a guy who goes along to get along. This is a guy who believes not only in the principles of the Constitution, but is really fighting every day, not only for Texans, but, you know, for America at large. And I felt very compelled to support someone with that kind of conviction, someone who could
Absolutely.
ideally believe in what they were doing and fight for it every day. And it doesn't mean that I ever was even asked if I was going to vote for him. I
Right.
mean, the fascinating thing about that is he's such a gentleman, he never asked. I mean, I think it was more about bringing skill sets to a marketplace and deciding on what discipline we would go to market with. And there are, you know, a whole other series of things that I teach, one of them being market disciplines, you know, whether or not a candidate is you know, a product leader, meaning are they a disruptive force? Are they going to be able to do something that no one else has done before? Is it a product that's coming to market where we didn't know we needed it, but once we had it, we couldn't live without it, right?
Right.
Take a look at an Uber or
Uh-huh.
an Apple or even a cell phone. I mean, these were things that, in essence, my generation didn't have when I was in college. So these are now things that people couldn't even imagine living without. So a product leader is something that is unique in itself. Then there are candidates who are much more customer intimate. You know, they're good old boys. They're, you know, everyone likes them. They are so well received. They're warm. They're friendly. They say yes to everything. Sometimes maybe saying yes too often and not necessarily doing what they say they're going to do. But in general, that's a different market discipline. And then there are those candidates who are operationally excellent, who really are all about, you know, making a decision, moving on it and living by it and just not looking backwards. But the reality is the mechanics of an operationally excellent type of candidate has to be perfect. Like, for instance, when you're on a campaign trail, if you say 10 o'clock, you don't show up at 10:01 if you're operationally excellent. If you're someone like Cruz who could care less about time, he would show up at 10:20, but he was so warm and so engaging that people gave him that pass because he was so actively wanting from stop to stop to make sure that if somebody was waiting to shake his hand, he never left that room. And unless people saw that live, they wouldn't have known that about Cruz.
Yep. I think one of the things that sets you guys apart, and you're a prime example of this, and I think Roe gets a lot of credit, and the senator from the very beginning, is they knew that the traditional model for presidential campaigns was not going to work for them. That they were going to be a disruptive force. That was as kind of that market leader. That's what Ted had been, and that's what he was going to be. And the only path for him as a junior senator from Texas was going to be disruptive on the presidential campaign scale as well.
Yeah.
And I think that they really realized that, and bringing you on, somebody that had never done campaigns but had extensive experience in the corporate branding side, that was an early head nod towards the fact that they were like, this is going to be we're rewriting the playbook. And
Right.
so they brought you in to help run those very specialized plays. Talk me through, start talking about some of the differences between or how you took your corporate branding experience and started applying that to a campaign, especially obviously a lot of this as you were developing these strategies that happened live during the early days of the presidential campaign leading up to the announcement. Tell me a little bit how that went.
Well, one thing that I remember so vividly is our first conversation, even talking about our launch. And you mentioned earlier that it was at Liberty. It was March 23rd, I believe, 2015, that we launched the campaign. And I had 2 weeks' notice. and they started using terms on these calls called an exploratory. And I kept saying, what the heck is an exploratory? What are we exploring? Are we launching or are we not launching? I mean, and everyone was laughing, right? Because even the terminology I didn't know. They talked about advanced teams, and I kept talking about, oh, you need travel staff? I mean, because those are the terms that we use in corporate America. So it was really sort of, at first, getting on a bus that I had no idea where we were headed, and looking at road signs that were really in a language I had never seen before, and then trying to interpret, oh, yeah, that's what you mean. Okay, I get that. Advanced team, travel staff. I can get people to show up at the events, no problem.
I love it.
But we were talking about the launch, and the launch was scheduled to be at Liberty, and I didn't have any input as to where we were going to do it, and I probably wouldn't have even known to do it at Liberty, but it was the perfect location for the senator, given his background and his strong faith and his strong will in wanting to be respectful of religious liberty. And here were 10,000 young students who were going to be in an audience. And at first, as I said, they were talking about exploratory. And then literally when I questioned it over and over again, they said, you know what, let's just make this the launch. Absolutely. So he was first to launch. And when we got to Liberty, I realized that I had two options. One is to put him on a podium with a microphone and a backdrop, or put him in the center of the room. And I looked at him and I said, Senator, any chance you could talk without notes? And he said, oh, Bonnie, I have no intention of talking with notes. And I said, are you promising me that? Like, you can't change your mind like the day before, get nervous on me, and then all of a sudden I have to redesign this entire room. And he said, oh, no, I have absolutely no intention. I talk always without notes. Well, I had a candidate, or I had, quote unquote, a product that I thought was unique in itself. So that was the most important thing for me to want to showcase, that this man was so driven by his own ideas and his own ability to articulate them that he didn't even need a teleprompter. He could actually speak off the top of his head. And not only could he speak off the top of his head, he could be passionate, intelligent, and moving.
Absolutely.
He got standing ovations when we were at Liberty University, because I think whether they were willing to accept whether they were going to vote for Cruz or not at that time, and remember, he's first out, so there were 16 others that followed. We were a pack of 17 in the Republican GOP primary. He certainly got more news in that day than anyone else. As a matter of fact, I'll still never forget Peggy Noonan in the Wall Street Journal. She opens her paragraph off by just saying, wow, and that's Peggy Noonan. So I think no matter how we looked at where we were headed or what we were doing, once we got on that train, it never stopped. And we were just literally managing the brand, and I think really the essence of Senator Cruz on a day-to-day basis. And there were no exceptions to it. Every piece of marketing material, every event we went to, every button, every logo, every signage, every backdrop had to be in alignment with the brand. We just couldn't make any mistakes. And that was the key. And I'm sure probably if we look back over the hundreds of events we did in the course of that time, there were probably a few things we'd love to wish we could have done a little differently, or maybe could have rethought. But as you know better than I, or certainly your listeners know better than I, campaigns move. I mean, they move so fast. The truth is when you're on a campaign, it's moving so incredibly quickly. Right. That there's no opportunity to say, oops, I got to go back. And right. As you know, most candidates, at least I learned this on the road, the gaffe is when they make a mistake, when they say something incorrectly, or they are quoted or misquoted. That can break a brand. So we had to be extremely careful as to what we were doing and how we were doing it.
Well, and you guys deserve a lot of credit for that, because when you look at the field of 17, there was an incredible number of unforced errors. And in many cases, those ended up contributing to or directly causing the dropouts. We saw everything from Marco Rubio and his getting called out by Chris Christie for being robotic in New Hampshire. We had it's all kinds of people made unforced errors, and Ted made a few, but by and large, and especially until later in the campaign when it was just pretty much he and Trump. Prior to that, there was an incredibly low number, very few that I can recall, that were truly unforced errors. And you guys were very conscious the whole time of being very, very careful about being consistent with your brand, being careful about everything from how the backdrop and the flags were folded, all the way to who was on the stage with him, who was speaking, what folks were saying, and making sure that it was all very, very focused on making sure that the brand was being communicated effectively to each voter that tuned in. And you knew that the media in general was not going to be friendly to helping, that they weren't going to give you free points there. You're going to be having to fight for that, and you're going to have to be making sure that you communicated so clearly that there was nothing that could be said or spun another direction. And I think you guys did a remarkably good job of that.
I mean, I think we worked on it every day. I think everyone was committed to it. I know that, we had strong teams in data analytics. We had strong teams in political grassroots. We had strong teams on the event side with my team. Obviously, our fundraising and our finance arm was strong. We worked as a machine. I mean, we really worked like a cog that really was moving forward and everyone in the same direction. It was a very likable team. We all got along very, very well. I'm told that's not always the case either.
No, it's not.
So again, being new to it, I don't have anything to compare it to, but I do think the caliber of people that worked on the campaign, along with the caliber of the candidate, made for a win-win for us. And I think it's really a moment of pride for me to see how well Senator Cruz is doing now in using his incredible intelligence, his ability to really understand and drive solutions, his willingness to get along, but get along with people who are willing to listen versus people who are saying one thing at home and then doing something back up on the Hill. He's still someone who has in him that opportunity to pull it out and, call someone out for not behaving correctly. But I do see you're seeing what I would call like the next generation of the brand. Now it's evolving. Now it's having an opportunity to be more at ease with who it always was. Those things are really, really something that a brand does as it continues to grow within a marketplace and have more brand awareness. And brand awareness is simply, do people know you?
Right.
Have they heard of you? What's their impression of you? And those are the things that I think at this juncture is pivotal for Senator Cruz to continue to develop.
I think you're exactly right. And kind of, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but as I've seen kind of his brand evolution and kind of that maturing process, early on and through, I don't think he's fundamentally changed in any significant way, but early on he really became known for, especially during the Senate campaign and through the early days of the presidential, really became known as somebody. He was uncompromising. He was going to be a fighter. He was going to call people out, whether it was on the debt ceiling or gun bills or Obamacare. He was going to stand up for what he believed in and fight for the 26, 27 million Texans that he was elected to represent. That was it. And he wasn't going to pull punches or back down to folks. And now, as you've seen, both us coming to the majority in the Senate and we have the White House, he is, and since the presidential campaign, in a lot of areas, he's been working more with different types of people and showing that, well, people may have thought that he was just, in some cases, an uncompromising jerk. But the fact is, he's, the genial guy that we know and love, and able to show that and able to work with different people. And you get a lot more done now that we're in the majority. But I think that from a branding perspective, if you lead with that, I can't remember what you called that type of candidate. What was the second category you mentioned earlier?
A customer intimate.
Yeah. So if you're more of the customer intimate type, in his case, working with his fellows there on the Hill, if you lead with that, it's very hard to define yourself secondarily as that market leader. But I think because he showed himself that his primary category is market leader, being able to build out those other areas seems to be a little bit easier and protect your core brand identity.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, because I think what's important to realize, and obviously at Political Branding Associates, we spend a lot of time working with candidates and their campaigns, really starting out by suggesting, I can't make someone customer intimate a product leader, and I certainly am not going to try to make somebody operationally excellent customer intimate. So the key to this is not necessarily thinking there's only one winning type, okay? That's the key to branding, is to really look at the product you're offering and knowing what are the qualities that you need to bring out in the most effective ways that in essence may be something that people really want, they just don't really realize. So you don't only have to be a product leader to win, and you don't necessarily have to be liked by everyone to win, and you don't necessarily have to be the most organized to win. What you do need is probably all three components. But once you understand who you are and what you can live by and what are the character traits that are going to be identified with you, we call that political brand identity. Those things are the things that your team then has to execute against. And that's really where the teachings come in. So it's not about trying to make somebody, and that's what I mentioned earlier in our talk, you can't make somebody a product leader if they're not. And if you tell people that they are, they're going to see right through them that they're not. So you almost best, if you're really passionate about running for office, or you really have a need to work in whatever area of public service you want to be in, if you are a public servant, whether it's a down race or obviously a presidential race, you have to be able to communicate who you are based on who you are, not based on fancy words that other people want to put in your brand promise or in your slogan or in your logo, because that instantly will be pulled out by the electorate as not real. Okay.
Right.
You know, everyone's talking about fake news. We can have a whole conversation about that. But the truth is, right now, everybody's on hypersensitivity on real versus fake. And there's nothing more genuine than a real brand executed in a way in which it's in alignment with the person that you're bringing to office. And that's really was the win for Cruz, because we never told you anything about him that wasn't true, ever.
Absolutely.
Even trusted, okay, was a fair opportunity for us to bring to market, not because President Trump was capable of twisting it, but because it really was who Ted is. You
Right.
can trust him. So no one could break that down. And that, of course, is for a whole other dialogue of why the last two standing was Senator Cruz and Donald Trump. Donald Trump's brand was 35 to 40 years older than Senator Cruz's, so it had a much longer runway. It didn't make it better. It didn't make it worse. It just made it much more well-known. And for the things that he was looking to emphasize at the time, at the place, in the arena that he was in, he could feel his own brand in the crowds that he was drawing. I'm talking about President Trump right now.
Right.
And he knew never to waver from his brand. And when he did, every time a new campaign manager came in trying to make him more political or more polished or more of a politician, his numbers plummeted.
Yep.
And every time he went back to being Donald Trump, he soared, because the timing of what he was bringing to the market brand-wise was what the market wanted to buy. And that's simply how the presidency came to be in 2016. It had nothing to do with anything else, in my opinion, but the strength of brands. That's what won that marketplace.
I think you're very, very correct. I mean, you couldn't be more right there. And I think it's especially important talking about the work that you've been pioneering and really building the political brand of Ted. You really had the two people with the strongest brand standing there at the end. I don't think there's any question about that. And
Right.
when you look at where President Trump attacked Senator Cruz, it was 100% on branding. What was his?
He didn't want
attack?
anybody getting close to his brand. Exactly.
It was not about. It was not on the issues. I mean, for right or wrong, he attacked the brand. He knew that's where the threat lie. And so when you see there, our brand was trusted. And so what did he count with? Lie and Ted. And and he didn't and hasn't since. He's been playing pretty nice with Senator Cruz, and they're both trying to get some work done. But at the end of the day, he was not interested in doing anything other than attack the brand. He knew that's where the threat lie. And so he did, and he did so well.
You are dead on. You are dead on. That is exactly what he did, because he's a master brander.
Absolutely.
I mean, he understands that President Trump's mindset, regardless of how the media tried to take control, which they never could, was if they're talking about me, I don't care what they're saying, but they're talking about me. So he is from the belly up street sense of a brand. If you know my name, that's more important than you never hearing of me. So, or never having heard of me. I think you are 100% right that what he went after was not the brand, was not, Ted's issues, because his issues actually turned out to be Trump's issues in
Right.
many ways, right? And it wasn't about our campaign, because it was running like clockwork. He could only attack on the thing that he was most threatened by, and that was a brand coming into play that could potentially surpass his own brand. And that is what you saw. And you identifying that, again, just brings branding even to a whole next level of what we're going to have to do in the 18 midterms, and what we're going to have to certainly prepare for 2020. I think you can also very politely say, on the Dem side, Bernie Sanders had a very strong brand. Okay, so it wasn't only on the GOP side. Hillary Clinton had really very, very minimal attention to her brand. She was running on entitlement, that basically you've heard of me, I'm great, therefore you'll vote for me. She wasn't building any set of values or a brand personality that people could actually align with. But Bernie Sanders did a phenomenal job on the Democratic side of building his brand and finding a movement that could follow it. So it's not, and Obama had a very strong brand, especially in his second term. People understood who he was and what he stood for, and whether he got the job done is out for another dialogue or another conversation. But brands that resonate with people are going to soar. But remember, we have a lot of incumbents running in the midterm for 2018 who really have to start being aware of the fact that it's not party politics as much anymore as it is individual politics and what you bring to the table as a brand.
Well, and with Hillary, I think that's a good example of what happens when you don't focus on the branding side. I think they confuse name ID with brand. And,
Correct.
She had nearly universal name ID. Both she and Donald Trump did, well before the campaign began. And they're each people with 30 plus years of public experience and public exposure to build, 96, 97 or so % name ID. Virtually 100% of the people out there that would be voting knew who they were. They knew something about them. But the difference was that I think Trump was very intentional about how he built his brand from day one. He's a master of that. Whereas with Hillary, there was she had a brand, but it wasn't an intentional one. I think both for the people that loved her and hated her, they got to build their own brand in their mind, and she had not done a good job of building a cohesive brand that was thought out and from her direction was actually or had any kind of concerted direction to it.
Well, and the other thing I just want to raise as another way to look at branding is, in this marketplace where the media is in control of how much visibility and how much awareness you actually get in building a brand, if you don't have a brand, they create one for you. So in essence, you're taking all the power out of your own individual brand and you're handing it over to the media to decide who you are. I always use this analogy with our clients, saying, if you're playing tennis, you want to hold the racket and you want to place the ball. Well, as soon as you give the media the racket, well, they're going to place you wherever they want you because you've handed over your power. And ideally, one thing that every GOP primary race struggled with was getting any kind of media awareness that was positive, or any at all, once Trump was, on the move, because they found him so interesting and fascinating that they helped build his brand. And this is what comes back to Trump getting it. If you're talking about me, I'm winning. If you're not talking about me, I'm not winning, because he understood his brand had to have visibility in order to win. And they actually put him in office, even though I think their initial goal was to pick the least likely candidate in their mind and put that candidate up against Hillary Clinton, and then for sure Hillary would win. And look what happened. It backfired, because you can't take a brand and break it down if it's strong. But you can place that ball anywhere you want it if it has no brand. I call it the brand backbone. Unfortunately, I think Marco Rubio is a great guy. I think John Kasich is a great guy. I think Jeb Bush is a great guy. I mean, there was probably no one running that were not great guys, right? And of course, Carly Fiorina was an incredibly intelligent woman who brought a lot to the campaign arena, but they did not have any brand building going on in their operation, and that's why they got lost in the sea of sameness. And I call it that sea of sameness because they couldn't break out of that water. They just couldn't get out of it. And Cruz did.
Well, I think when you look at especially the presidential debates, a lot of the time that's where you have these 17 people, as we saw in a couple of different debate stages, and they're trying to set themselves apart, and many of them look the same. Even if you're just a voter that's only meeting these people from the first time, when they're coming on the debate stage, there's a lot to see similarly about them. Everybody's saying a pretty conservative message. They're all looking the same, got similar backgrounds of one degree or another, but I think the difference was, and part of why Ted experienced, even beyond his debate skills, part of what set him apart was he had that pre-existing brand. He wasn't there trying to differentiate himself. He was differentiating himself elsewhere. At every single stop he made, everywhere he opened his mouth, he was differentiating. So it wasn't a new thing for him to be different when they were on the stage. And it made it look a whole lot more like folks were chasing him or trying to differentiate themselves on minor points.
No, I think you're, again, dead on. And I remember very vividly one debate that we had where the senator took the stage and he said, I may not be the guy you want to ask to go for a beer, but I'll be the guy you'll rely on to drive you home. Now, I thought that was clearly probably one of the most poignant ways Senator Cruz could have differentiated his brand from everyone else's. I could not stop clapping when I heard that line. And there were people on the campaign who were a little bit uneasy about it, thinking, oh, you're just telling people you're not likable. But you see, from a branding standpoint, he was not telling people that. He was telling people you could trust him. You could rely on him. At the end of the night, if you want to go wild and crazy, there's someone standing next to you that will get you home safely. And I think that in itself is the essence of Ted Cruz. And to this day, I think we're seeing him live that out, even as he's going through the healthcare negotiations in saying, I might not be the guy you wanted to talk to, but you have to because I'm the brains at this table and I've got some serious intellect to share with you. Listen to me. So I think that in itself is coming out as well. Again, an extension of his brand as it evolves.
Well, and I also thought that was a pretty smart way to embrace what I think a lot of people were trying to spin as a negative. The unlikability, the quote unquote punchable face. I mean, these are things that people were saying on the campaign show, right? And you've got to, you can't just say, oh, that's not true. You can't say, no, I don't have a punchable face. No, I am likable. Because if you do that, that accomplishes the opposite. You're just repeating what the negative attacks and you're giving that credibility. But what he did there was he took that and he spun it and say, look, you may not think this about me. You may not think I'm the guy you want to have that beer with, but I'm the responsible adult that's going to make sure that we're on the right track and we're headed the correct direction.
100%. And I hope the senator continues always thinking that way because I believe that the American people can use someone like that, certainly leading this country, for sure.
I agree 100%. Let's kind of move on a little bit from talking about the campaign-specific stuff. A lot of the strategies and tactics you developed there, you talked a little bit about how those can start helping down ballot as we're looking at 2018. Let's kind of rough out, what are some of those major things you think need to be in place from a branding perspective or how you approach establishing or even just exploring what somebody's brand is, what the core components are as you're getting to know a candidate and trying to figure out what can we build here?
So that's a great question. So ideally, I don't think anyone should run for office if they're not willing to look within, be somewhat retrospective, have people who know them best sit around the table and whether they like it or not, really tell them how they come across. So a brand is a very tangible thing. It's something you want to touch. It's something you want to be with. It's something you want to understand. And ideally, it's something you want to either adopt or not adopt, right? We call it in corporate America an adopter. How do you adapt to something? When I'm working with candidates, and I'm working on a lot of races right now that are down ballot, there's a very interesting opportunity to just sit down with the campaign team and sort of call them out a little bit on them having created a logo, they create a website, they then put a slogan together and we're ready, let's go. Well, it doesn't necessarily really work that way. Not so much. Those things are urgently important, and I'm not suggesting that you don't focus on them. But really doing that before actually defining the overall brand itself is only going to hurt you in the end because it will never get you past what it is the look and feel is about. So we sit down with campaigns and we have them really start to draw out brand attributes. What are the characteristics of the person? How do you go about understanding what they'll do under all circumstances? What's their identity? What's their brand personality? How do they come across in everyday situations? How do they come across in stressful situations? ideally, what do they look like? How do they carry themselves? Where are they best put? What kind of locations? As I again refer back to knowing at Liberty University that I had this great opportunity to not put a microphone in front of him and he could walk the stage in the round. That comes from the fact that I knew he himself was able to do that. And it broke all the barriers down because he could look across an audience everywhere in the room and not be stuck just behind a podium. So that's part of a brand attribute. What are the capabilities of the individual? Then what becomes really interesting is how you mold those components. And that's truthfully where I think, a company like ours, Political Branding Associates, and even people who are brand experts will know how to take some of those characteristics and build something off of them. What is going to be sexy and what is going to be a little less important, or what are some of the things that could hurt us and what are some of the things that could help us? What are some of the things that we like about him and what are the things that we want to talk about that we dislike? To the point earlier made, he might not be the guy you wanted to go for a beer, but he's the guy you rely on to get you home safely. Those are things that we were looking at through a brand's kaleidoscope, and just trying to drive what are the things that we want people to know. Visuals are very important. I also tell people if they walk into an event and it's very chaotic, that's a reflection on the campaign, and that's a reflection on the candidate. If it's disorganized, if it's not clean, if it's not housed correctly, if the audio visuals don't work correctly, or if you're not taking the time to really think about where he's going to do a press gaggle, how is that going to look? So all of those things come into and fell under the brand umbrella, because they affected the candidate from a perception standpoint. And those are the things that I want everyone to understand, regardless of their budgets. They have to start thinking about moving forward, because I don't believe the political landscape will ever be the same again.
No, it's not going back. It's one of those things that once you have these types of huge changes on the political front, you can't go backwards. It's no different than radio or TV making their appearance on from a presidential debate stage. You can't go back. Or Eisenhower starting with the press briefings and those kind of things. It just doesn't happen any differently.
Right.
So I think that you've really hit on something that I take very, very seriously, and that's the pre-work, the really getting those introspective questions and diving into who the candidate is, and before the campaign's ever pulled the trigger or announced, diving in and saying, who is this person? What do from their perspective, what do I believe? Who do I see myself as? Who do the people around me? And really figuring out what your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats are. Understanding your personality, and we developed a lot of tools through the My Campaign Coach program that we work with people and try to really pull a lot of information out of them, and just so that we can get this down on paper.
SWOT has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's certainly a tool that can be used, but even deeper than SWOT is really doing the brand elemental work. And that is something that I think really has to be taken to heart moving forward, simply because most people think, okay, well, he's a Republican, so they're going to say check, 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 check. He's a Democrat, he's going to say check, 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 check. I think what we're seeing now in this new political landscape, on top of the branding and on top of the market discipline work that we're doing, is also, I don't want to use the word disassociation with the party, but a realignment with the party system, because they don't want to necessarily be labeled before they have the right to come out and be who they are.
Right.
So if we continue to work off of only an issue-based race, people already know the issues, so they've already turned their ear because they've heard it 100 times, they've seen it 100 times, they're actually becoming immune to it. So unless you want to get some visibility with just somebody even listening to something new, you have to give them something new to listen to.
Yeah, you got to set yourself apart as unique, and that's a core part of establishing that initial brand, is saying, hey, these 3 of us or 5 or 17 of us, we may agree on a lot. They're issue-wise, or maybe a lot similar, but here's why I'm different. Because you walk down the aisle at Walmart and see 20 different types of baked beans. Well, what's going to be the one you buy? Okay,
right.
You have to set apart your brand and show why, even though you read the nutrition facts and they all look the same, what's going to set you apart? Why do I pick up this can versus that one?
Right. And sometimes it could be as simple as you like the label.
Yeah.
So
the aesthetics.
So the logo ultimately will matter, but it's not your brand. Your
Right.
logo's not your brand. Your website's not your brand. I mean, another story is always looking at websites from a different perspective and realize what kind of tool they can be. It's the first impression someone has about you. And when I got to the Cruz campaign, one of my biggest initiatives was to change the website because I just really felt like it wasn't in alignment with who he was. And the company who I hired to change it ended up winning a Poly Award for the actual website as being the best presidential website that was out there. So I was very proud that we were part of that. But it also was bringing corporate thinking to a political world because we understand that our image in corporate America is probably the most important thing to the consumer, as it's going to be moving forward for every constituent and every voter. They are going to want to know, what's your image and can I align with it? And do you talk to me and do I feel you? And are we on the same path or are we on the same page? Are we in alignment?
So what are some of those political branding elements you mentioned that I can take or that one of our listeners can take and apply to their state house or city council campaign?
Well, I think it's going to come down to really understanding the individual. I think it's going to be sort of laying out the issues on one page, looking how those issues align with their personal views. How do those personal views get projected, and how do we get people to understand them and see them and know them? What are the actual individual attributes? Are they likable? Are they kind? Are they generous? Are they giving? Or are they a firebrand or someone who in essence is, full of new ideas and wants to bring a change to Washington or a change to policy? Is it somebody who just really believes that things are run amok and it just needs to be better organized and it could be more efficiently run and efficiency comes into play? These are the types of words we use to describe not only a product, but to describe a process. And that process and product together becomes the candidate.
I like that. So you have all those questions, you work through and figure out kind of those core branding elements, the ideas and the attributes that are going to make up in some sort the brand. And then what do you do from there? You kind of distill that down into what the major ideas are you want to communicate through your logo and through your website and those kind of things. Is that kind of the train you take?
Yeah, I think it's one step to it.
Right.
Certainly, you're going to be able to look at this individual in a different light, and you want to make sure that whatever tagline you are offering up is in alignment with what they really believe and that they're going to live by. You certainly don't want them to have something that people will say, well, that's the last thing I would have ever expected coming out of their mouth. It's also part of the look, color scheme, how you design things. Is it cleanly written? Is it visible to anybody? Remember, you're dealing with all different age groups, and when people go on a website, they see things differently. Let's talk about the finance side. I mean, branding was one of the biggest things we did with our donor development. I mean, our donors understood our brand, and I spent time briefing them on the brand and making sure that they understood it so that when they were at their friends' dinner parties or cocktail parties or Jim, they could talk intelligently about Senator Cruz, not just use something that the media created, but we were using a platform that we created and having that re-communicated on our behalf. So you want to make sure that anything that you write or say, what would someone say about you if you weren't in the room? That's really would be your best way to understand the brand from an external standpoint. And then how can they describe it in an elevator ride?
Right.
You got a minute and a half. What can you tell me about this person that's going to get me to understand them and resonate? So you want things that really drive that individual's ability to make change.
I think that one of those things that really came across clear for you guys that drives me crazy about a lot of campaigns, especially smaller ones, is that I see so many campaigns that everything about their brand is ad hoc. Their sign, their logo, their palm card, their website, they're all created sometimes by similar vendors, but there's no cohesive plan for how all those work together. And I think one of the things I've noticed from seeing your work and looking at your website and the work that Political Branding Associates does is that you make sure that everything from the event to the merchandise to the logo to the talking points are all thought out and combined. They're woven together in a cohesive format that all does one thing, and that's support the brand, which is supporting
Right.
the candidate.
And I'm finding so fascinating as different campaigns are calling us and asking us to get involved or get engaged. The first thing they'll say is of course, what does this cost? Now, and I'm not going to talk about costs on the show, but what I will talk about is the fact that you can print 100 yard signs But if nobody's heard of you, it's meaningless. So really building a brand is not by, ticker taping everyone's name everywhere. It's really allowing people to understand what is that brand about. So I'm trying very hard to bring to this campaign mindset that the way you have done things before, don't repeat them, because that's
Right.
not winning. There's a lot of other tools that you can put in your tool chest that could give much greater opportunity, whether it be through our digital content or our social media. All of that was always in alignment, or any donor event or donor retreat that we created was always in alignment with the brand. We did not go off a deep end and do anything that would not have reflected well on who he was as an individual. And I really believe that for any of our clients moving forward, that's exactly what we're going to do. And they'll be different from one candidate to the next, because those candidates are different.
Yeah, it's something you've got to have. You got to have an intentional brand, because you're going to have a brand whether you're intentional about it or not. You may just not be the one, like we talked about with Hillary. You just may not be the one deciding or helping shape what that brand becomes.
Right.
Tell me a little bit more about what you guys do at Political Branding Associates, and how you take all these strategies and tactics you develop and deploy them on behalf of campaigns. Kind of what do you guys do for them?
The first thing we created was a 2-day workshop that I work with the candidates and their actual campaign teams, their staff. And we go in, and it's almost like we are going in like for a scientific study. And it really does force everyone at the table to participate in a way that I don't think many of them have ever been asked to participate before. And it is solely for the purpose of really pulling out what are the elements of this brand that we can go to market with. And then once we sort of get those characteristics and we understand that strategy, and we are able to build a strategy off of those individual personality traits or characteristics, we then do a second component, same day or part of the same 2-day exercise, where we then teach them how to bring it to market. And that's the second part to it. So it's not just ideally coming up with all of these characteristics and then throwing them on a whiteboard and saying, okay, that's what we're running with. But it's also then breaking it into what I call the discipline of those markets. How do we go to market? Is it going to be with a product leadership mindset? Is it going to be with a customer intimate mindset? Or is it going to be with an operationally excellent mindset? And those 3 components play heavily into how we scope the entire campaign, how we scope events, how we scope advance, how we scope marketing material, or push pieces, how we develop the website, what are our communication tools that we use, is it digital driven, is it a combination, do we need advertising, what does TV and radio look like, all of that comes into play. So it is a beginning to end 2-day piece, and then clients ask us to stay on, usually for a small retainer on a monthly basis, just to sort of check the messaging, check in with what they're doing, make sure that it looks right, help them with press releases, or come up with a marketing piece or an article that we might write about the candidate that just would speak from a different perspective. All of those things get put into the mix, and ideally hand them off a product that they can go to market with.
That's fascinating. I love this whole arena of branding. I think it's absolutely critical to people being successful, and especially when we're looking at. You mentioned the difference between branding an incumbent versus a new candidate. And a lot of our audience are folks that are thinking about running for office or are first-time candidates, or they're working on campaigns of first-timers and helping get started in this political world. And I think that being able to build from scratch, being able to go from, there are obviously unique challenges with being a challenger or being a first-time candidate. But I think this area of branding, it really allows a unique opportunity as you're embarking on this first campaign or really getting out there to be able to brand yourself and be intentional about that from soup to nuts. The whole idea of this brand, if you're intentional about it and you're careful about how you go through this process, it really gets to work as kind of an asymmetric warfare tool that your opponent may not have or may not be able to exercise with as much power as you do. And if these first-time candidates take advantage of that, I think it offers them a huge force multiplier that it can help even that field.
No, I couldn't agree more. And I don't think that it matters what race you're running. And if it was an incumbent, I think the same rules apply. I think the landscape of the political arena has changed drastically. And if they are up for re-elect, they're going to have to figure out how to communicate who they are to the voter directly and not necessarily rely on party politics to be their driver. It's got to be a combination of them coming to market and almost like their own debut and letting people know not only what they have done for them, again, they're an incumbent, but ideally how they see the future and how they are going to continue to deliver on what they promise. So it works for both, those who are just starting and those who've been in office 6 years.
You're 100% right. What kind of final closing words do you got for folks, or any kind of closing advice?
I think stay true to yourself. I think really look at your candidates as an opportunity to really grow not only their image, but what they stand for. I think that it is an opportune time to not necessarily fall into any stereotype. Each candidate has every reason for wanting to be different, and I think allowing the voters a chance to view them with their own eyes and their own ears versus having the media sculpt it for them or having someone else, align what their issues are, what they stand for just based on whether they're a D or an R, is going to be detrimental. I think that the world is their oyster right now to really go out and really bring a different way of thinking to campaigning and to the actual candidates themselves. And I think we're going to see some really exciting races moving forward to 18. I really do.
Well, I'm excited about that. I'm excited about seeing some of the races that you're working on come out there and getting to kind of view that from this side and getting to learn as well. I'm going to be linking in the show notes and on the blog post that accompanies this at mycampaigncoach.com to some of the Medium articles you've been writing, some of the blog posts you've been putting up.
Right. I'd ask people to watch us, to just pay attention to medium.com and just look up Bonnie Siegel. I think the articles we're writing are thought-provoking and we're getting a lot of attention, so follow me on that. And then just go to our website, politicalbrandingassociates.com. I think you'll see some up-and-coming things or ways to think about things that you may not have thought of before. And I'm happy to chat with anyone at any time because I think this is really exploding now. I think it's really going to be the next ingredient to how campaigns are run.
I couldn't agree more. We'll be sharing all those links in the show notes. Where can folks find you online from a social media side?
So they can Twitter. They can also look at Teresa Hong, who is my Senior VP of Communications, who's doing all the public relations work for political branding. All that information is on our website.
I love it. We're going to be having Teresa on here in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking about her experience doing social media and the Trump campaign, which would be really cool. Bonnie, thank you so much for coming on. It's a pleasure.
Oh, my pleasure.
I've loved it, and I've learned a lot. I hope our listeners have too. And we're excited to have Teresa on here in a couple of weeks. You have a wonderful day. Guys, we'll be back next week with a new show. And just make sure you go to mycampaigncoach.com, sign up for our email list, subscribe to the podcast, and let us know what you love the most about Bonnie's conversation with me today about political branding on our Facebook page or on Twitter. Y'all have a great day.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.